Hello, everybody. My name is Len Ber. This is a presentation that I given at the symposium on January 26th, Truth to be Told, Reality of the Targeting Program. The topic of my presentation was 10 myths about Havana syndrome, and in which I tried to remove the veil of mystery and combat intentional malinformation about this condition. Let's start. Myth number one. The government wants us to call it AHI, which is anomalous health incidents. It's an incident. It's not a condition. It's not a disease. It's not a syndrome. It's an event. So it's really a misnomer for what's going on with us. It is a condition, and I will tell you exactly what the correct name of it, so you will be empowered by this knowledge. Because we know 85% of target individuals are victims of some kind of directed energy attacks. So a little bit of history. Havana syndrome, the term was coined by a physicist from Belgium, Dr. Ludwig de Brachelier, who runs inteltoday.org blog. And so in 2017, shortly after it started, at the very end of 2016, he coined this term, and it stuck. You might also hear an expression, Havana cohort, and that refers to those specific 25 employees of the Department of State that were attacked in Cuba. So they have their own clinical manifestations that are somewhat limited to this group of individuals. So Havana syndrome is one thing. Havana cohort is those 25 individuals. They were examined and diagnosed by Dr. Hoffer at the University of Miami. And then in 2018, the government, Department of State, finally said we should call these anomalous health incidents. In 2018, Dr. Michael Hoffer published a landmark paper, Acquired Neurosensory Dysfunction, about those 25 Cuban diplomats and the CIA agents. And he said, I could not, because everybody was talking about similarities about MTBI and the Havana syndrome, how it's a silent injury, it's an immaculate concussion. And he said, no, first of all, there's no concussion. So there's no MTBI. MTBI is synonymous with concussion. And the second, the manifestations are different. There's a different degree of vestibular damage. There's a different degree of headache. There's different clinical manifestation. So no, it's not. So he had to give it a separate new name, Acquired Neurosensory Dysfunction. The paper that is accessible freely on PubMed, I will publish all the links in the description. In 2019, CDC publishes case definition of Havana syndrome as a biphasic disorder. It means it runs in two phases. Phase one is when you're experiencing these attacks, and it encompasses up to 2 weeks after the last attack ended. And that's phase one. The phase one contains the actual attacks, and it has certain symptoms and complaints. And then the second phase is when your attacks are over, and then your brain is just slowly degrading, or no, you rehabilitate your brain. But targeted individuals, of course, are stuck in a phase one because we never allowed to recover. We just attack, degradation, attack, degradation, attack, degradation. Brain degradation is a strategy of targeting program. And finally, in 2019, a political scientist who also advises the NATO on emerging technologies coined a term, Neurostrike. And I think this is the most appropriate term for what's causing a non-kinetic brain injury, formerly known as Havana syndrome. Listen to the definition. Neurostrike weapon is a platform-mounted or aerial-mounted radio frequency directed energy neurocognitive disruptor, which is designed to harm, disable, or permanently damage a human brain. So you have a Neurostrike weapon that produces Neurostrike, that's an attack, and that produces non-kinetic brain injury. And then in 2021, a journal of special operation medicine publishes an article in which it describes something called UBI. That's synonymous with Havana syndrome. That's also synonymous with non-kinetic brain injury. And they specifically write about it as an intentional directed energy attack. Consider the egg metaphor as a potential contrast between the two. If TBI involves dropping an egg onto the ground, then UBI could involve placing the egg into a microwave. Each approach could induce extensive damage, but in very different ways. And so finally, today, we have somewhat a consensus that what's called Havana syndrome should be called non-kinetic brain injury. Non-kinetic, Neurostrike, nothing is moving, there's no concussion, there's no mechanical damage, no physical object that damages your brain. That's why it's non-kinetic. Nothing is moving except the energy. It penetrates the brain and it induces brain damage. RNKBI would stand for repeated or recurrent NKBI, which is what we experience. And the current classification, the international classification of diseases, ICD-10, does not have NKBI. This is in the works, but for now, the closest match in the ICD-10 would be brain injury other, and I provided you with the code. Myth number 2, it's a mass psychogenic illness. We all know two main proponents of the MPI, mass psychogenic illness, or mass hysteria as we used to know it, but this is not a politically correct language anymore. The FBI with the Jason report, and Dr. Bartholomew, a psychologist currently lecturing in New Zealand. However, the two most comprehensive reports, the National Academy of Science of 2019 and the Intelligence Community Report on AHIs, which was issued in September 2022, they both reject MPI as implausible. And it's easy today, after we know all this information, and we know that this is an actual injury to the brain, the easiest way to reject the hypothesis is to falsify it. So biomarkers associated with MTBI and concussion, called neurofilament light chain protein, or NFL, and glial fibrillary acidic protein, GFAP, are elevated in patients with AHI. Levels return to normal within a few weeks, which matches the time course after MTBI, indicated damage to the blood-brain barrier and neural injury. So here we have evidence that invalidates the mass psychogenic illness. You cannot produce those biomarkers at those level, and with that time curve, by being exposed to the idea that there are weapons out there. And for those who are not familiar with the 2022 Intelligence Community Expert Panel Report, here's the cover page of it. It was obtained in March of 2023 via FOIA request by the Medicine Project for another legal case. That's how we know that it exists. We know what it says. A lot of it is redacted. However, it has enormous value for our cause. Myth number 3, and we heard it all. The symptoms are general and non-specific. They're talking about CIA agents having a hangover and calling it the Havana syndrome. Those jokes are all not funny. Here's why. Although some signs and symptoms of AHIs are common in known medical conditions. The combination of the four core characteristics is distinctly unusual, is unreported elsewhere in the medical literature, and so far has not been associated with a specific neurological abnormality. So that's why it's not just the symptoms, but the fact that they happen together. That's what's so unique about this condition. And since we're talking about the four core characteristics here, they are the acute onset of audiovestibular sensory phenomena, including sound and pressure. Sometimes it's just one ear or one side of the head. I can tell you that this audiovestibular sensory phenomena can be very, extremely painful and debilitating. You cannot walk, you cannot talk. Sometimes all you can do is scream to combat this sensory pressure that will get you through the attack. I don't think people realize the gravity of this phenomenon. When you are attacked, you're not yourself. You are completely engulfed by this energy. Number two, other nearly simultaneous signs and symptoms such as vertigo, loss of balance, and ear pain. All true. Three, a strong sense of locality or directionality. The absence of known environmental or medical conditions that could have caused the reported signs and symptoms. So all these four make the four characteristics, and they all happen together. Myth number four, doctors just don't know how to diagnose it. Not true. Yours truly, the first civilian to be on a disability with NKBI, and I'm on disability, not from Social Security disability, from a private insurance company. And if you ever worked for a private insurance company to obtain disability, you know that it's very hard to part them with their money. And so, especially for a condition that is not officially recognized by the US government to take place in a civilian population. Nevertheless, here I am on disability with this diagnosis. So I hope that gives you a little hope. I have a page on targetedjustice.com that I curate where I place all the information. See the link in the description. The classic diagnosis, 2018, Hoffer's landmark paper, Acquired Neurosensory Dysfunction, lays out initial diagnostic criteria based on studying the Havana cohort. It was 25 people. So these criteria are still valid. You can still diagnose it based on the criteria laid out by Dr. Hoffer in that paper. And moreover, in 2020, there's a joint paper, Hoffer and Balaban, called Distinctive Convergence Eye Movements in an Acquired Neurosensory Dysfunction. That study showed that using a computerized test, you can distinguish between the brain injury in the Havana cohort of Havana syndrome or NKBI from MTBI, mild traumatic brain injury, or known as concussion. And the test is objective, computerized, oculomotor test. So another diagnostic tool. In 2021, the Congress issues a Havana Act, and President Biden signs it into law. If you can get compensated for a neurological damage as a result of NKBI, and they call it traumatic brain injury, penetrating injury. They don't use the term directed energy. They don't want to tie themselves up to a specific mechanism. However, you can get compensated if you are an employee of the Department of State or you work with the CIA. Those two categories, you can get compensated, and all you need to do is get diagnosed by a board-certified neurologist. So that myth that doctors do not know how to diagnose it, the Congress tells us that they can diagnose it. And once again, that the same 2022 analysis of potential causes and mechanisms, the Intelligence Community Panel report, contains most recent diagnostic criteria recommendations. I highly recommend going to the source. More diagnostic tools. One of the methods outlined in the Havana Act is electroencephalogram. That's a tool used by neurologists mostly to detect epilepsy. However, there is a method of quantitative EEG electroencephalogram with SW Loretta. SW Loretta is just a computer package that enables to synthesize some information in a very particular way. So it's extremely helpful. It's a tool highly complementary to other tools like fMRI, CT scan, and it's direct. It actually measures neuronal activity between neural nodes. It measures the actual electric charge that travels from one node to another. And fMRI would measure it indirectly. So QEEG is actually the direct method for measuring electric activity of your brain. And this is the normal neurotypical healthy individual. You see a bunch of nodes on the left. Connectome shows occasional abnormality in the convection. Look at QEEG from a targeted individual with the diagnosis of MKBI. All those dark blue lines show abnormal connectivity. Specifically, brain connectivity degrades and shows abnormally high amount of delta connections. So delta waves are the slowest waves between 0 and 4 hertz, and that's the speed between the neural nodes. Should not be detected in the awakened state. The delta speed connections are only supposed to be detected during sleep or hypnotic state. So once again, Neurostrike causes neural disruption, and in patients with MKBI, you can show this neural disruption using one of the methods, fMRI, fine, but QEEG is the direct method of measuring electric signals. We're still on the same myth. In order to connect the dots, what doctors need to do is to record energy exposure while the patient is undergoing a neurostrike attack. Doctors don't do it, but if they wanted to, in every intelligence report on AHI and Havana syndrome, methods of detection are classified. So it's the government that holds this information secret and does not want doctors to be able to diagnose a recurrent MKBI with utmost certainty. Myth number 5. Civilians do not suffer from it, only diplomats and spies in a foreign land. That's a nonsensical myth. Multiple experts, including Dr. Giordano, who's the worldwide renowned expert on neuroweapons, stated at the medical conference dedicated to Havana syndrome in 2022, he confirmed the existence of civilian victims. In 2022, he wrote an article and said that it is a matter of public safety. Public safety, public health, this is a condition that affects civilians. Myth number 6. Every government official, from Anthony Blinken to William Burns to Christopher Wray, repeated this statement numerous times, only to actually never get to the bottom of this. If you're a target individual, if your Congress person sent a letter to the FBI inquiring about your case, you are diagnosed with this condition, this is what FBI will write back. In order for the FBI to initiate an investigation of any complaint we receive, specific facts must be present to indicate that a violation of federal law within our investigative jurisdiction has occurred. Based on the information provided, we're unable to identify any violation of federal law within the investigative jurisdiction of the FBI. We're therefore unable to be of assistance. This language, this is a specific language. The fact that they repeat it twice, this is not a coincidence. This is their response. And when you ask the FBI, so what facts would be sufficient for you to open investigation? They simply do not respond. So Christopher Wray, we'll get to the bottom of this, is a myth. Weapon number 7. We don't know anything about weapon system causing Havana syndrome. That's the government position. But no journalist actually asked them about this. And I don't know why. Or maybe I do. Well, all we have to do is to look in the congressional record. Directed Energy Weapons System Acquisition Act of 2016. This is a congressional act that was read on the House floor, on the Senate floor, and was passed on to the U.S. Armed Forces Committee for Acquisition. The bill, though, has a definition of what directed energy weapon systems are. It means military action using highly focused sound, electromagnetic, or particle beam energy to incapacitate, damage, or destroy enemy equipment, facilities, or personnel. That's humans. Another interesting fact about the same myth, that the government simply doesn't know what it is and how to diagnose it. What happens to people exposed to this directed energy weapons? In 2023, there was a podcast released by Project Brazen called The Sound Mystery of Havana Syndrome, with the host Nikki Wolf, who asked the following: is there a type of microwave weapon out there that can cause the specific symptom profile that the victims in Havana experienced? That means something capable of not just causing headaches, nausea, hearing and vision impairments, cognitive problem, even brain damage and all that, but also do it in this precisely targeted way. So I figured I might just as well ask Giordano, he's referring to James Giordano, straight out, just getting straight to the point. Does the US have devices that can do that? And Professor Giordano answers, after a very measured pause, yes. Myth number 8. Oh, the weapon looks like a ray gun. Oh, we heard this a lot. Let's go back to the act, the Congressional Act of 2016. It talks about directed energy weapon systems. And systems means that it has distributed sensors using a range of biomarkers and targeting mechanisms. And the sources of directed pulse energy can also be distributed, mounted on platforms, on drones, delivered from cell towers and satellites. And on top of that, we're talking about biomarkers and the way a person can be targeted very precisely. There's a phenomenon called MAC address emission, and it could serve one of the bioidentifiers for precise targeting of a person. This is a separate topic. I wrote in my Substack about MAC address emission. I personally emit a MAC address. This is not only a result of vaccination. I have a good confidence that before the vaccines were developed, this technology was tested on targeted individuals. And MAC address means media access control. This is a wireless technology using BLE, Bluetooth, low energy. If you have sensors around you, it senses, your phone senses where you are, your location of your head, it means that you have technology inside you that allows the sensors inside you to communicate with the outside using basically a router. What produces that wireless signal in your Bluetooth devices, it's something that emits it. So you have not necessarily a chip, but a self-assembled nanotechnology machine that emits that address in a digital format, because MAC address is a hexadecimal number. So we are analog, our biology is analog. You're not supposed to emit energy digitally formatted, but that's exactly what's happening here. Myth number 9. You can protect yourself if you knew the frequency that is affecting you. A lot of people want to shield themselves from microwave attack. So we know that the most plausible mechanism for non-kinetic brain energy is directed pulsed radio frequency electromagnetic waves in the microwave range. Let's break it apart. Directed or directable. It means that the energy forms a beam, and that beam can target a person's brain. Pulsed means that that signal, that electromagnetic beam is modulated. It means that there's a frequency of the carrier wave, and as the most plausible hypothesis suggests, it's that wave is in the microwave range, so between 300 megahertz and 300 gigahertz. That's the microwave range. So that's the carrier wave. But if we modulate it, if we pulse it in the frequency that our brain operates, and our brain operates in the single hertz. So, for example, if you pulse it at, let's say, at 4 hertz, and then you project it onto the brain will read those 4 hertz, even though the carrier wave is a completely different frequency. So the frequency of carrier waves almost doesn't matter. What matters is the modulation that has the biological effect, in this case, pulsed. And also, on top of that, the type of the wave, we need to go deeper, also matters. We need to know about the difference between longitudinal waves versus transverse waves. They're also called Tesla and Hertz waves. And I have a visual explanation of these 2 types of waves. So imagine on the bottom, the transverse waves, it oscillates in the direction perpendicular to the way that the wave propagates. And that allows you to shield yourself. For example, with a Faraday cage, if this oscillation, let's say it's a 0.5 millimeter, so if you put a Faraday cage with openings that are 0.3 millimeter, then you can protect yourself from these transverse waves. On the other hand, the longitudinal wave, it also oscillates, but the oscillation looks like a slinky. It oscillates in the way that the wave propagates. And that, the penetration of that wave is simply unstoppable. You can't shield yourself. And if it forms a beam, that beam stays very, very narrow, and you can hit a target from a long, long distance. The penetration of this type of wave is compared to a penetration of neutrino. It goes right between the atoms. There's literally no material that will shield you from that. That's why people experience these attacks 50 feet, 100 feet underground. It literally goes through the earth. And therefore, in this case, you cannot protect yourself. And myth number 10, the government can keep these weapons secret away from the public scrutiny. Do you believe this myth? My favorite phrase, nothing stays secret forever. And it will get exposed. There's no way. What the government is doing is painting itself into a corner. It's simply impossible to keep this secret forever. China brags about these weapons. Other countries, Nigeria, talks about non-kinetic weapons. They're actually honest with their civilian population about using non-kinetic weapons against the bandits. So here's my favorite quote from Robert McCreight. Coming to grips with reality of non-kinetic disabling technology, which aims to specifically degrade neurological and cognitive functions, requires the suspension of disbelief among those who resides in the comfortable confidence that no such weapon exists. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope that Havana syndrome will be soon out of our vocabulary, because we can all say that we are experiencing recurring non-kinetic brain injury caused by neurostrikes.